part of the US or the world you're listening from. Don't forget you even more interesting stories. It was 11:10 p.m. My husband slapped me because there was no dinner on the table. He screamed, "Get in the kitchen and cook, you worthless woman." I stayed silent and walked into the kitchen for 20 minutes. When I came back with a covered silver platter, they thought it was a delicious meal. But when I lifted the lid, the contents weren't food, but a one-way ticket to their own personal hell on earth. The wall clock in the living room read 11:10 p.m. Outside, the suburban street was submerged in a deep, heavy silence. The only sound was the soft crunch of my car's tires rolling onto the concrete driveway. My body felt utterly crushed. I had spent the entire day at the accounting firm, dealing with mountains of audit reports that had to be ready for the partners by the next morning. My head was throbbing with a sharp pain, like a hammer striking my temples over and over. Still, I forced a faint smile. I imagined the soft, plush bed waiting for me in just a few moments. All I wanted was a hot shower and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I killed the engine and trudged exhaustedly toward the front door. The house keys jingled in my hand, which was trembling slightly from fatigue. As I opened the door, a blast of cold air from the central AC hit my face. Strange. Usually, by this time, the living room lights were off, but tonight, the whole first floor was blazing with bright light. Suddenly, a knot formed in my stomach. My steps faltered in the foyer when I saw 3 people sitting on the living room sectional with unreadable expressions. Jason, my husband, sat dead center, his legs crossed with arrogant entitlement. To his right was Carol, my mother-in-law, glaring at me with sharp, accusing eyes. To his left was Madison, my sister-in-law, mindlessly scrolling on her iPhone, though she occasionally shot me a cynical smirk. Before I could even say hello, Jason sprang up from the couch and marched toward me with long, aggressive strides. His face was flushed red with anger, his jaw tightly clenched. I could see the veins bulging in his neck, a clear sign he was about to explode. "Honey, I just got home." I couldn't even finish the sentence before a brutal slap landed squarely on my left cheek. Smack! The sound was so sharp it shattered the quiet of the house. An intense stinging and burning sensation spread across my face instantly. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side. I stood completely paralyzed. The sheer exhaustion weighing down my body seemed to evaporate, instantly replaced by an overwhelming, suffocating shock. My right hand trembled as I touched my cheek, which was already starting to go numb. I looked at Jason, desperately searching for even a sliver of remorse in his eyes. But there was nothing, only the glare of explosive fury. "Do you have any idea what time it is, you selfish bitch?" Jason screamed right in my face, a drop of his spit hitting my blouse. "Who do you think you are? Coming home at this hour? Out partying and screwing around while your husband is sitting at home?" I fought back the tears threatening to spill over. "Jason, I've been working overtime. You know it's tax season. We have an insane amount of work. Besides, I texted you this afternoon," I replied, my voice shaking but trying desperately to maintain my composure. I refused to look weak in front of them. "Excuses!" Carol interrupted, her voice shrill and grating. The older woman stood up from the sofa and pointed a manicured finger at my face. "What kind of wife are you? We've been sitting here for over an hour, starving to death. There is absolutely nothing on the table. The pots are empty. There's nothing but cold water and condiments in the fridge. Do you want your husband and me to die of starvation?" "Seriously," Madison chimed in, not even bothering to look up from her TikTok feed. As if I were less important than whatever influencer she was watching. "A little self-awareness wouldn't hurt, Emily. Jason is exhausted from being stuck in the house all day. The absolute bare minimum a wife can do when she gets home from work is bring takeout or cook a hot meal, not show up empty-handed." "God, you're useless." I looked at them, one by one. Jason had been unemployed for 6 months after being fired for embezzling company funds, though he constantly lied to our neighbors, telling them he was launching a tech startup. Carol, who demanded thousands of dollars from me every single month to fund her country club brunches, spa days, and shopping trips with her snobby friends, yet was entirely incapable of washing a single dirty plate in this house. And Madison, a 25-year-old grown woman whose only full-time job was sleeping, eating, and buying designer clothes online, using the supplementary Amex card linked to my account. Every single one of them lived off my sweat. Every single one of them breathed under the roof of a house whose mortgage I paid entirely on my own every month. And now, they were screaming at me and hitting me because I was late to cook them dinner. "Get your ass in the kitchen right now, woman," Jason roared again, this time shoving me hard by the shoulder. I stumbled backward, slamming into the entryway shoe rack. "And don't you dare come out until there is a decent hot meal on the table. And watch it if it tastes like garbage. I'll smash the plate right in your face." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the raging inferno of anger igniting in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit all the frustration, resentment, and disgust I had swallowed for so long. I wanted to kick them out into the street right that very second. But no. Blind rage would only ruin my plan. I needed absolute, ice-cold calm to pay them back in the most agonizing way possible. An elegant, flawless revenge they would remember until the day they died. I straightened my posture and smoothed out my blouse. I looked Jason dead in the eyes. There was no more fear or sadness in my gaze, only an empty, terrifying coldness. "All right," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I'm going to prepare a very special dish for you, exactly what you deserve tonight." Without waiting for his response, I walked right past him, ignoring Carol's sneer of disgust and Madison's mocking giggle. I marched straight into the kitchen, the place where I usually spent hours acting like their unpaid maid. But tonight would be different. Tonight, the aroma of a delicious home-cooked meal would not waft from this room. Tonight, this kitchen would become the staging ground for their absolute ruin. Once inside, I shut the door firmly behind me. I leaned my back against the wood and closed my eyes for a moment to gather my strength. My cheeks still stung fiercely, but the betrayal in my heart was far more unbearable. During our 5 years of marriage, I had tried so hard to be the perfect, devoted wife. I turned a blind eye to Jason's laziness. I endured Carol's constant belittling. I catered to Madison's endless spoiled tantrums. I naively thought that with enough patience and love they would change. How stupid I was. My patience had only fed the monsters living inside them. They had become greedier, crueler, and completely shameless. I opened my eyes. The tears I had been holding back dried up instantly. Parasites like them didn't deserve a single drop of my sorrow. I walked over to a corner cabinet, where I kept the important items I had been hiding. Enough was enough. This pathetic family drama was ending tonight. Chop, chop, chop. The sound of a heavy chef's knife rhythmically hitting a wooden cutting board echoed loudly through the kitchen, easily piercing the walls and reaching the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking out there. They were probably smiling smugly, feeling victorious for having broken my spirit once again. They must have thought the foolish, terrified wife was frantically chopping onions and searing steaks to satisfy their pampered stomachs. But there wasn't a single ingredient on the granite countertop. I was just slamming the blade against the bare wood, over and over. It was all part of the show. I wanted them to feel like they were on top of the world right before I kicked them off the cliff into the deepest abyss. While my right hand kept up the fake chopping noise, my left hand was busy preparing the real main course. I pulled out a massive, ornate silver serving platter that we usually only used for Thanksgiving or major holidays. The silver gleamed under the recessed kitchen lights, but I didn't place a pot roast, mac and cheese, or a sizzling steak on it. Instead, I reached under the sink and pulled a thick manila folder from a secret compartment. It was a folder I had been meticulously compiling for 3 months, waiting for the perfect moment to serve it. I opened it and pulled out 3 key documents. First, the deed to the house. Back when we bought it, I used my own savings for the down payment. However, Jason threw a massive fit, manipulating me into putting his name on the deed so he would feel respected as the man of the house. But last month, after I paid off the remaining mortgage balance using my massive annual corporate bonus, I quietly worked with a trusted real estate attorney to have his name legally removed and the title transferred solely to me. It was a tedious process, but because Jason had forged my signature on tax documents in the past, my lawyer used that leverage to force the transfer, without Jason even noticing the paperwork mixed in with his other legal messes. This piece of paper was irrefutable proof that every brick, every tile, and every blade of grass on this property belonged entirely to me. Second, the divorce petition. The paperwork was fully drafted, stamped, and signed by me. It detailed every single ground for the divorce: verbal abuse, financial abandonment, and physical violence. Thankfully, The slap that just occurred had been perfectly captured in 4K resolution and uploaded to the cloud by the hidden Nest camera I had installed in the living room last week. I was done financing a man whose only talent was barking orders. Third, a stack of bank and credit card statements as thick as a novel. I had used a bright yellow highlighter to mark every single outgoing transfer from my accounts that funded their lavish, parasitic lifestyle. Jason's luxury SUV car payments, the thousands Venmoed to Carol for her country club memberships and spa weekends, Madison's endless Nordstrom, Sephora, and designer bag charges, even the daily charges for Jason's beer, gas, and sports betting. It was all meticulously documented. The total sum was astronomical enough to buy a nice condo downtown. This was the undeniable proof that I was the sole financial pillar of this household. I carefully arranged the 3 documents on the silver platter, the deed in the center, the divorce petition on the left, and the highlighted bank statements on the right. Then, I covered it all with a massive, polished silver cloche dome. Perfect. From the outside, it looked like a 5-star gourmet meal. I checked my Apple Watch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed. It was time for the main event. I picked up the heavy tray with both hands. It didn't feel nearly as heavy as the dead weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for the last 5 years. In fact, it felt like the most beautiful burden I had ever held. I took a deep breath, fixed my face into an expression of utter indifference, and pushed the swinging kitchen door open. In the dining room, all 3 of them were already seated at the large mahogany table. Their faces were masks of greedy impatience. Forks and knives literally gripped in their hands, ready to devour whatever I had slaved over. When Carol saw me walk out with the massive covered platter, her eyes gleamed. "Now that's more like it," she scoffed, adjusting her posture. "A wife needs to know her place. Bringing home a paycheck isn't enough. The stomachs of your husband and your mother-in-law come first," Jason snorted, his face still holding a sour scowl from his earlier rage. "Took you long enough. This better be the best damn meal I've ever had. If it's bland, you're going right back in there to make something else." Madison even craned her neck, trying to get a better look. "What's under there, sister-in-law?" "It's weird, I don't smell anything. You didn't just boil some cheap pasta, did you?" I didn't say a single word. I walked to the head of the table and, with a slow, solemn motion, lowered the tray right into the center. The heavy clunk of the silver hitting the glass tabletop made them fall silent for a second. I stood at the end of the table, looking at them one by one. My completely deadpan expression made Jason frown. Maybe his primal instincts were finally picking up on the drastic shift in the room's energy. "Go ahead," I said simply. "This is the absolute best thing I can offer you tonight. Eat until you choke on it." Impatient and annoyed by my tone, Jason reached out and grabbed the handle of the silver dome, yanking it up aggressively. Let's see what the hell his sentence died in his throat. As he set the dome aside, the metallic clatter echoed loudly in a sudden, suffocating silence. There was no hot steam. There was no mouth-watering aroma of roasted meat or herbs. There was just a neat pile of legal paperwork. Jason's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He squinted, trying to read the bold legal font on the top document. His face, which had been flushed with arrogant red fury just moments ago, rapidly drained of all color, turning a sickly, ashen gray as he recognized the official state seals and the letterhead. "What? What the hell is this?" His voice trembled, no longer with anger, but with deep confusion and creeping, primal panic. Carol, needing her reading glasses, grabbed the thickest stack of papers, the bank statements. "Where is the food? Why are you serving us mail? Have you lost your damn mind, Emily?" But as she flipped the page and saw the highlighted numbers thousands upon thousands of dollars, her jaw dropped. "This. What is all this?" Madison, who was faster on the uptake, snatched the divorce petition. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and she gasped loudly, looking at me with her mouth hanging open. "Jason, Emily is filing for divorce!" she shrieked hysterically. The room instantly exploded. Jason slammed the property deed against the table and jumped to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "A divorce petition? Who the hell do you think you are trying to divorce me, you ungrateful bitch? And this deed? Why is only your name on it? Where is my name? You forged this. You're trying to steal my house." I smiled. It was a sickeningly sweet smile, but it radiated pure, cutting ice. "Eat up, Jason. Eat up, Carol." "Madison," I said, my voice eerily calm, locking eyes with my husband. Feast your eyes on those numbers. That is the exact amount of my blood, sweat, and tears that you three have consumed over the years. And as for the deed, the house is legally 100% mine. The original title is sitting safely in my bank's safety deposit box as of this morning. That's just a certified copy, so feel free to rip it up. It won't change reality. I then turned my gaze to Carol, whose hands were visibly shaking as she gripped the financial statements. And effective immediately, I am evicting all of you from my property. You have no right to kick us out. Carol shrieked, her voice so high-pitched it made my ears ring. This is my son's house. Jason is the man of this house. You're just a guest here. Man of the house? I let out a soft, bitter laugh. What kind of man of the house relies on his wife's paycheck to buy his beer? What kind of man lets his mother treat his wife like the help? Just so you know, Carol, your precious son hasn't contributed a single dime to this household in over a year. Even the electricity powering the chandelier above your head right now is paid for by me. Jason growled like a cornered animal, his fists balled up tight, ready to strike me again. He started storming around the edge of the table, making a beeline toward me with clear, violent intent. You shut your mouth! Take it all back right now, or I swear to God, You'll what? I challenged, not taking a single step back. Instead, I tilted my chin up, daring him. You want to hit me again? Go right ahead. Look up in the corner, Jason. The hidden Nest camera already recorded you slapping me earlier. One more move, one more touch. And that footage gets automatically emailed to the local police department and my divorce attorney. Along with the divorce papers. Would you like me to add a felony domestic assault charge? I hear the county jail has terrible food. Jason stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly lifted his head and saw the tiny, blinking red light of the camera tucked into the crown molding. His face contorted into a hideous mixture of raw fear and venomous hatred. He realized, with crushing certainty, that he had walked straight into a steel trap. Get out, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. Now. The stunned silence lasted only 3 seconds before the room descended into absolute chaos. Carol was the first to completely lose her mind. The older woman, who prided herself on maintaining the elegant image of a wealthy suburban socialite, began wailing like a banshee. She swept all the paperwork off the table with her wrinkled hands, scattering it across the hardwood floor. Her face was drenched in tears, not of sadness, but of furious, humiliated rage. Her pride had just been curb-stomped by the daughter-in-law she viewed as nothing more than a walking ATM. She simply could not process the reality that her life of luxury was evaporating before her eyes. She slammed her palms on the dining table over and over, her voice turning hoarse as she accused me of being a scam artist. She screamed that I had manipulated Jason, that I must have used some legal loophole while he was vulnerable to steal his assets. Her accusations were downright laughable. How could I steal Jason's assets when he literally owned nothing? Every single thing in this house, from the silverware to the cars in the driveway, was bought with my money. But logic doesn't apply to parasites panicking over losing their host. Jason, paralyzed by the threat of the camera, was pacing back and forth across the dining room like a caged tiger. He was pulling at his hair in pure frustration. His wide, manic eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for a loophole, a way to regain control of the situation. He bent down, picked up the crumpled copy of the deed, balled it up, and threw it at me. It bounced harmlessly off my shoulder. It was a pathetic, impotent gesture. He knew he had zero legal ground to stand on. The documents were ironclad. He knew exactly whose money he had been burning through. Madison, the spoiled princess, reacted differently but just as infuriatingly. Instead of screaming in rage, she collapsed onto the floor and threw a hysterical, sobbing tantrum, clutching the $3,000 designer handbag she had bought last week using my credit card, of course. She begged her brother to do something. She was terrified of being out on the street, terrified she wouldn't be able to flex on Instagram anymore, terrified her sorority sisters would find out she was actually broke. Her pathetic whining gave me a slight headache, but at the same time, it filled me with a deep, intoxicating satisfaction. Finally, she was feeling the crushing anxiety of financial ruin, the exact same anxiety that kept me awake at night every time I looked at her credit card bills. I stood completely still at the end of the table, with my arms crossed, letting them hyperventilate and self-destruct for a few minutes. I enjoyed the front row seat to the collapse of a dynasty of freeloaders. When I decided playtime was over, I walked over to the corner of the living room, behind the heavy blackout curtains. I pulled out 3 massive, heavy-duty black hefty contractor bags, stuffed to the absolute brim. I dragged them to the center of the room. The loud scraping sound of the thick plastic against the floor made them turn around. Using all my strength, I shoved the bags toward them one by one. Thud, 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 thud. The 3 giant garbage bags landed right at their feet. Jason jumped. Carol stopped her banshee wailing, and Madison choked on her sobs. They stared at the trash bags in utter bewilderment. A faint smell of mothballs and stale dust drifted up from them. "Those are your belongings," I stated in a flat, emotionless tone. "I packed them this afternoon while you 3 were out at the mall spending my money. Your clothes, your cheap shoes, and whatever personal items I deemed legally yours are in those bags. The rest, the things I deemed trash, or the luxury items you bought with my money that you don't deserve to keep, have either been thrown in the dumpster out back or locked away to be sold online. Don't even bother trying to go upstairs to your rooms. I changed the locks on the bedroom doors this morning. You have 0 access to any part of this property except this room and the front door." Madison shrieked in horror and ripped open the top of her plastic bag. Her belongings spilled out onto the floor, expensive dresses shoved in haphazardly, crumpled blouses, shoes piled up without their pristine boxes, and expensive makeup tossed in loosely. She wailed even louder, screaming that I was ruining her designer clothes by treating them like garbage. I didn't care. To me, it was just junk that needed to be purged from my sanctuary. Carol stared at me in disbelief, as if I had suddenly morphed into a demon. She dramatically clutched her chest, gasping for air, initiating her classic fake heart attack routine. She began to wheeze, hoping I would panic, soften up, and call off the eviction. In the past, that trick worked every single time. Whenever I stood my ground, she would pretend to faint or have palpitations, and I would end up apologizing and bringing her water. But tonight, I just stared at her with dead eyes. I had read the results of her full physical checkup last month. Her heart was in perfect condition. The only thing rotten and diseased about her was her soul. Jason tried a different approach. Realizing anger wouldn't work, he tried to switch to his manipulative, charming persona. He lowered his voice, putting on a pitiful face, and stepped toward me, trying to grab my hands. I yanked them away in disgust. He started rambling about our good memories, the vows we took at the altar, and what the neighbors in the HOA would think if we got a messy divorce. He was trying to weaponize pity and social anxiety, entirely forgetting that when you abuse a woman's heart enough times, it freezes over and turns solid as concrete. There were no cracks left for Jason to slip through. I checked my watch again. Exactly 5 minutes had passed since my ultimatum. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and held the screen up for them to see. I had the number for the gated community's 24/7 security booth queued up. I looked Jason dead in the eye, delivering my final, non-negotiable warning. My patience was completely drained. "Pick up your trash bags and drag them out of my house," I ordered, my voice cutting like a whip. "If you are still standing on my hardwood floors in exactly 10 seconds, I hit call. Gary and the HOA security guards will come and physically remove you for trespassing." Imagine the absolute humiliation of being dragged out of here like common criminals while all the wealthy neighbors record it on their phones. The choice is yours. Walk out on your own 2 feet, with the microscopic shred of dignity you have left, or leave in the back of a security golf cart while the whole neighborhood watches. 1, 2, 3. Jason froze. He was as pale as a ghost. He searched my eyes for any sign of a bluff, but he found none. He only saw lethal seriousness. With trembling hands, he bent down and grabbed the neck of the heaviest black bag. He snapped at Madison to stop crying and carry her own damn stuff. He yanked his mother up by the arm, forcing her to abandon her fake asthma attack. The reality had finally crushed them. The cash cow had woken up, and her word was law. I pulled the heavy oak front door wide open, revealing the pitch-black night. A violent gust of wind howled into the foyer, bringing with it the heavy, icy drops of a sudden thunderstorm. The sky itself seemed to be blessing my house-cleaning ritual, unleashing a torrential downpour the exact second they stepped outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, matching the adrenaline-fueled pounding of my heart. I stood firmly in the doorway, making sure they actually left the porch with their pathetic garbage bags. Jason led the walk of shame, carrying a massive black bag slung over his shoulder. He looked pathetic, light years away from the arrogant man who had slapped me just an hour ago. His crisp button-down shirt was instantly soaked by the sideways rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He kept his head down, trying to hide his humiliation. Behind him, Madison was struggling, crying out every time the plastic bags snagged and tore on the aggregate concrete driveway. Carol waddled behind them, carrying nothing, trying desperately to keep her chin up to salvage her pride, though she was already visibly shivering from the biting wind. The moment Carol's expensive heels crossed the property line onto the public sidewalk, I slammed the heavy front door shut. Bam! The echoing boom was the final period at the end of the darkest chapter of my life. I threw the deadbolt and locked the security chain. Seconds later, loud, frantic pounding started on the wood. Jason was outside, screaming my name over the roar of the storm. First, he was shouting insults, then his voice cracked, turning into pathetic begging. It sounded muffled, drowned out by the relentless rain drumming against the roof. I didn't flinch. I walked into the dark living room and pulled back the edge of the window blinds to spy on them. Out on the driveway, the three of them were standing in the open, completely exposed. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking them to the bone in seconds. The cheap garbage bags were drooping and leaking, making them look like literal homeless people. Jason kept hammering his fists against the door, assuming my empathy would override my anger once I saw them suffering. He was dead wrong. Seeing them freezing in the rain was a healing balm to my soul. It was pure, unfiltered karma for years of abuse. How many times had they left me standing in the rain waiting for an Uber after a 1-2 hour shift because Jason took my car to go drink with his buddies? Let them feel the freezing water seep into their marrow. The commotion on my porch eventually drew the attention of the neighborhood. The lights in the massive houses on either side of mine flicked on. A few neighbors opened their front doors or peeked through their blinds to see what the disturbance was. Jason, realizing he suddenly had an audience, pivoted his strategy immediately. He stopped swearing and started crying loudly, playing the ultimate victim. He shouted to the neighbors, claiming I was a psychotic, abusive wife who had just thrown her husband and sickly, elderly mother out into a hurricane. He put on an Oscar-worthy performance, hoping neighborhood pressure would force me to open the door to avoid a scandal. Help! Someone help us! My wife has gone crazy. My mother has a heart condition. Please don't let us die out here, Jason yelled, pointing dramatically at my house. Carol, whose instinct for theatrics was unmatched, dramatically collapsed onto the wet driveway, pretending to pass out. Madison dropped to her knees in the puddles, shaking her mother's limp body and wailing hysterically. It looked like a scene from a cheap soap opera. I could see the HOA president, an older man who lived 3 doors down, stepping out onto his porch with an umbrella, looking concerned. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let Jason spin a false narrative. I grabbed my phone and dialed the neighborhood security gate. It rang twice before Gary, the burly head of HOA security, answered. I calmly requested that he bring his team to my property immediately due to a public disturbance. I explained that unauthorized individuals were causing a scene on my driveway and disturbing the peace. 2 minutes later, an HOA security SUV with flashing amber lights pulled up. Gary and another guard jumped out. They walked briskly up the driveway to where Jason was staging his tragedy. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it just a crack, leaving the heavy chain engaged so I could project my voice without letting Jason rush the door. Gary! Thank you for coming. Please remove these trespassers from my property immediately, I yelled, making sure my voice carried over the rain so the nosy neighbors could hear the truth. They no longer live here. We are separating. And this house is legally in my name alone. They are trying to break in and are causing a massive disturbance. Escort them out of the subdivision. Jason's jaw dropped. He frantically turned to the security guard. Gary, man, listen to me. This is my house. My wife is having a mental breakdown. Don't listen to her. But Gary was a professional who had worked in this wealthy suburb for years. He knew exactly who paid the expensive HOA dues on time every month. It was me, not Jason. Gary had also dealt with Jason multiple times, warning him for speeding through the neighborhood drunk or breaking up loud, obnoxious frat-style parties Jason threw while I was out of town on business trips. Gary had zero sympathy for him. I'm sorry, Jason, But Miss Emily is the sole legal owner of this property, and she has formally trespassed you. I need you to pack it up and leave the premises right now, or I'll have the city cops out here for criminal trespassing, Gary said sternly, grabbing Jason by the arm. Come on, we're walking you to the main gate. Jason tried to yank his arm away, but the two guards were massive and easily overpowered him. Carol, realizing nobody was going to carry her, miraculously recovered from her fake coma and scrambled to her feet to avoid being dragged through the puddles. They were escorted down the street like criminals. Jason's face was bright red with ultimate humiliation as he realized all the wealthy neighbors were watching him from their porches with blatant disgust. His aggrieved husband act had failed spectacularly. Just as they reached the end of my property line, Jason suddenly remembered something. He stopped, turned around, and yelled back at the crack in my front door. My car keys! Where are my keys? My wallet and my car keys are still inside. Throw them out. At least let us take the car so we don't freeze to death. I smiled, shaking my head slowly. I unhooked the chain and stepped out slightly onto the covered porch so he could see my face clearly under the outdoor sconce light. The car? What car, Jason? The black SUV? I asked in a mockingly innocent tone. Just so you're aware, the title to that vehicle is in my name. I paid it off completely last month with my corporate bonus. So, it's my car. I hid the keys where you'll never find them. You don't have a single legal right to that vehicle. But I need a car. Where the hell are we supposed to go in this storm? Jason screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. That sounds like a you problem, I replied coldly. You can walk. A little cardio won't kill you. You've been sitting on the couch for 6 months. Or call an Uber. Oh, wait. I forgot your wallet is on the kitchen counter, and every single credit card in that wallet, and in Madison's purse, is tied to my accounts. I froze all of them on the banking app 5 minutes ago. Your plastic is entirely useless. Jason stood frozen, as pale as a corpse. The absolute magnitude of his ruin finally crashed down on him. No house, no car, no credit cards. Not a single red cent to his name. Gary signaled his partner, and they forcibly nudged Jason forward. Keep moving, buddy. Stop harassing the homeowner, the guard warned. Defeated, broken, and humiliated, Jason, Carol, and Madison finally gave up. They were marched away from the multi-million-dollar neighborhood where they had lived like kings on my dime. They dragged their feet through the pouring rain, pulling the heavy black garbage bags that were now their only worldly possessions. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and locked the deadbolt. The storm was still raging outside, but inside my house, the atmosphere was unimaginably warm, quiet, and peaceful. For the first time in 5 years, I truly felt like I was home. I felt an astronomical weight lift off my chest. I leaned against the oak door, let out a long, deep sigh, and smiled. Tonight, I was going to sleep like a baby. The heavy iron gates of the affluent subdivision slammed shut behind them, acting as an impenetrable wall dividing the life of extreme comfort they had just lost, and the brutal hellscape that was now their reality. The thunderstorm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, the wind grew colder, biting through their wet clothes straight to the bone. Jason, Carol, and Madison stood shivering on the edge of a dark, empty suburban highway. There were no bus stops, no awnings, just thick pine trees that actually dripped more water onto their heads. The three of them looked like drowned rats swept out of a sewer, soaked, filthy, and utterly miserable. The cheap plastic trash bags, serving as their makeshift luggage, grew impossibly heavy as water seeped through the loose knots. They trudged aimlessly down the flooded sidewalk, the dim, flickering orange glow of the street lamps highlighting their faces, which were contorted in despair. Jason desperately dug into his soaked pockets for the 10th time, praying for a miracle, a forgotten $20 bill or a stray debit card. Nothing. Only wet lint. His expensive leather wallet, containing his driver's license, ID, and all his bank cards, was sitting on his nightstand inside Emily's house. Emily had calculated this execution with terrifying precision. Without his ID or wallet, Jason was a ghost. He couldn't check into a hotel room. He couldn't buy a hot coffee at a gas station. He couldn't do anything. His identity and his financial lifeline were locked inside a fortress he could no longer enter. Carol began to genuinely hyperventilate from the freezing cold. Her teeth chattered violently, and her lips were turning a sickly shade of blue. The woman who usually looked immaculate, dripping in jewelry and expensive makeup, now looked frail and terrifying. The rain had washed mascara down her cheeks, leaving deep, black, raccoon-like stains under her eyes. She croaked insults at Jason, her voice barely audible over the roaring rain. She cursed her son for being too weak to control his wife. In Carol's twisted, narcissistic logic, this was entirely Jason's fault for not being dominant enough, not a consequence of them abusing their provider. Madison stumbled behind them, crying in frustration. The heel of one of her $800 Louboutins snapped off when she stepped into a hidden pothole in the dark, forcing her to limp barefoot while clutching the ruined shoe. After 2 miles of agonizing walking, they finally stumbled upon a dark, closed-down strip mall. They found a small overhang outside a shuttered laundromat. Without a word, they collapsed onto the filthy, cold concrete floor, utterly exhausted. Jason leaned his back against the cold metal security grate. His stomach let out a violent, painful rumble. The hunger was kicking in with brutal intensity. The last time they had eaten was a light salad at noon, saving their appetites for the massive feast they had demanded Emily cook for them. Ironically, they had been served an unforgettable dish, just not an edible one. The phantom smell of a hot, juicy steak taunted Jason's mind, torturing him slowly. Madison pulled out her iPhone. The screen was cracked from dropping the heavy trash bag on it earlier. With 10% battery left, she frantically opened the Uber app to order a ride to a friend's house. But as she hit confirm, a bright red error message popped up. Payment method declined. It was directly linked to Emily's Amex. Emily had nuked everything. Panic-stricken, Madison started calling the wealthy sorority sisters and influencer friends she usually partied with. The first call went to voicemail. The second was declined. A girl named Chloe finally picked up the third call. But the second Madison tearfully explained she had been kicked out and needed to borrow money for a hotel, Chloe suddenly claimed she was losing signal in a tunnel and hung up. Madison screamed in frustration, threw her phone against the concrete wall, and buried her face in her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. That night stretched out into an endless, agonizing eternity. None of them slept a wink. Mosquitoes attacked their damp, exposed skin. The occasional roar of a passing semi-truck jolted them awake in terror. Every time a luxury car drove past, splashing water, Jason's chest tightened, remembering his beloved black SUV now sitting comfortably in Emily's heated garage. In the dead of the night, Carol began groaning, clutching her stomach in severe pain from the cold and the hunger. There was no medicine, no warm blankets, no hot tea. Jason could only stare at his mother with hollow, defeated eyes. A tiny sliver of guilt tried to surface in his brain, but his massive ego immediately crushed it, replacing it with a burning, venomous hatred for Emily. He swore to himself that as soon as the sun came up, he would get his revenge. Dawn finally broke. The morning sun was blindingly bright, but it did nothing to warm their frozen bodies. They were stiff, aching, and covered in a layer of grime. A disgusting, sour smell of damp clothes and sweat radiated from them. Early morning commuters stared at them in disgust, assuming they were just another group of drug addicts loitering at the strip mall. When the owner of the laundromat arrived to open up at 7:00 a.m., he shouted at them, threatening to call the cops if they didn't get off his property, throwing a bucket of dirty mop water dangerously close to their feet. Stripped of the last shred of their dignity, they dragged their trash bags to a rundown public park a few blocks away. They sat on a splintering wooden bench, enduring a hunger that was now causing physical cramps. Out of sheer boredom and masochism, Madison opened Instagram using her last few megabytes of cellular data. Her bloodshot eyes widened when she saw Emily's story, posted just 15 minutes ago. She shoved the screen into Jason and Carol's faces. It was a picture of a beautiful, artisanal avocado toast and a steaming latte with perfect foam art, set against the backdrop of a stunning, modern, high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. In the corner of the photo, in small, elegant text, Emily had written, "The best breakfast is one served without parasites. Feeling so blessed." Seeing that photo caused Jason's stomach to violently, not just from starvation, but from the toxic cocktail of envy and rage exploding in his chest. Emily was living her best life, thriving, while they were rotting on a park bench like stray dogs. Reality was hitting him hard. Without his wife's money, The world was a ruthless, unforgiving place, and they were completely worthless. Jason decided he couldn't just give up. He still had his job. Yes, he was a mid-level marketing manager at a mid-sized logistics firm. It wasn't a prestigious job, and the pay was mediocre, which was why he had been quietly skimming money off his expense accounts to fund his online sports betting addiction, a secret he thought he had kept from Emily. He figured if he could just get to his office, he could ask HR for a payroll advance, or beg a coworker for a loan to rent a cheap motel for his mother and sister. He had to salvage what was left of his manhood. He left Carol and Madison at the park, promising to return with cash and hot food by lunchtime. Running purely on adrenaline, he walked 3 miles to the downtown business district. He snuck into the public restroom of a fast food joint to splash water on his face and try to fix his hair. He couldn't wash out the terrible stench of his wrinkled, damp shirt, but he used wet paper towels to wipe the mud off his dress shoes. He looked absolutely nothing like a corporate manager, but he had no choice. When he walked into the lobby of his office building, the receptionist glared at him. Usually, Jason walked in wearing crisp Brooks Brothers shirts, smelling of expensive cologne, bought by Emily, radiating unearned confidence. Today, he looked like a survivor of a shipwreck. He ignored the stairs and rushed to the elevator. Inside, 2 junior analysts pinched their noses and completely ignored him. The moment he stepped off onto his floor and walked toward his cubicle, an HR representative was already standing there, her face set in stone. Jason, the CEO and the director of HR are waiting for you in conference room A. Right now, she said, devoid of any pleasantries. Jason's stomach dropped. An ambush meeting at 8:30 a.m. was a death sentence. With heavy dragging feet, he followed the rep into the glass-walled conference room. The CEO and the HR director were seated at the large table, a massive stack of manila folders resting between them. Their expressions were glacial. They gestured for Jason to sit. He tried to force a confident, charming smile, but his lips were visibly trembling. "What's going on, gentlemen?" "Bit early for a sit-down, isn't it?" Jason asked, trying to sound casual. The CEO slid a thick blue folder across the table. "Let's skip the bullshit, Jason. We've been running an intensive internal audit for the past 2 weeks. We found massive, glaring irregularities in the expense reports and vendor invoices filed by the marketing team under your direct supervision." Jason's heart literally stopped. He opened the folder with clammy hands. Inside were photocopies of falsified gas receipts, fake client dinner invoices from restaurants that didn't exist, and direct transfers of operational funds to shell accounts. For the past year, whenever his department's books didn't balance, Emily, who worked as a senior auditor for the elite consulting firm that handled this company's external accounting, had quietly fixed his errors. Sometimes she even transferred her own money into the accounts to cover his gambling shortages, desperately trying to protect her husband's career and avoid a scandal. But Emily's protective shield was gone. Not only had she stopped covering for him, Jason suddenly realized with terrifying clarity that she was probably the one who anonymously tipped off the internal auditors, handing them the exact paper trail they needed. I can explain this, sir. It's just an administrative oversight. A clerical error, Jason stammered. Blind panic taking over, cold sweat poured down his forehead. A clerical error? The HR director scoffed. $50,000 missing over 6 months is a clerical error? We called the restaurants. The receipts are fabricated. We know you've been funneling company money to pay off personal debts. Jason, the CEO interrupted, his voice booming with lethal authority. This company does not tolerate felony embezzlement. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated with cause. You will not receive a single cent of severance, nor will you receive your PTO payout, as we are withholding it against the damages you've caused. And let me make this crystal clear. If you do not reimburse the $50,000 within exactly 48 hours, our legal department is handing this entire file over to the district attorney. The police will come looking for you. Jason's entire universe imploded. Fired. 0 severance. Facing hard jail time. He slumped into the ergonomic chair, completely devoid of strength. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. It was over. The absolute last thread of his survival had just been snipped. He dropped to his knees right there in the conference room, sobbing, begging the CEO for mercy. completely abandoning whatever shreds of dignity he had left. They didn't care. The HR director signaled the building's security guards, who had been waiting outside the door. For the second time in less than 12 hours, Jason was physically escorted out of a building. He was marched past the desks of his coworkers, who stared at him in shock and thinly veiled disgust. The whispers followed him to the elevator. He was handed a small cardboard box containing his desk items, a cheap stapler, some pens, and a framed photo of himself looking smug. As Jason was shoved out the revolving doors into the busy downtown street, holding his pathetic cardboard box, he saw something that crushed his lungs, leaving him completely breathless. A sleek, black, chauffeur-driven Lincoln Town car pulled up to the VIP entrance of the towering glass skyscraper right next door, one of the most prestigious commercial buildings in the city. The rear door opened, and a woman stepped out. It was Emily. But it was a version of Emily he barely recognized. She was wearing a stunning, tailored, slate-gray designer power suit. Her hair was blown out perfectly, and a pair of chic Tom Ford sunglasses rested on her face. She walked with terrifying, magnetic confidence. Two junior associates flanked her, carrying briefcases, hanging on her every word. She was walking into a massive merger meeting. Her career had skyrocketed. Jason wanted to scream her name, to drop his box and run across the pavement to her. But his feet were glued to the concrete. He caught his own reflection in the lobby glass. Disheveled, filthy, smelling of garbage, clutching a box of pens. Meanwhile, Emily was shining like a flawless diamond. Just before walking through the glass doors, Emily turned her head. Through the dark tint of her sunglasses, Jason felt her eyes lock onto him. She didn't stop walking. She didn't gasp in surprise. She didn't wave. She simply looked at him for half a second, turned her head forward, and disappeared into the marble lobby, leaving Jason paralyzed on the sidewalk, the absolute definition of a loser. The destruction of his career was the final nail in his coffin, while the woman he had treated like a slave was soaring into the stratosphere, utterly untouchable. Jason trudged back to the public park, his steps heavier than lead. The midday sun was beating down, burning the back of his neck. He hugged the cardboard box to his chest, the ultimate symbol of his failure. During the agonizing walk, his stomach cramped violently, screaming for food. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the suffocating terror gripping his mind. He had to return to his mother and sister empty-handed. No cash, no food, and with the news that he was now an unemployed felon facing prison time. When he reached the park, the scene was pathetic. Carol and Madison were huddled together on the peeling wooden bench. They looked like wilted weeds. Carol was massaging her swollen ankles, while Madison fanned herself with a piece of dirty cardboard, a look of extreme irritation on her face. When they spotted Jason walking toward them, their eyes lit up for a fraction of a second. The desperate hope for a cheeseburger or a cold bottle of water flashed across their faces. Madison even jumped up, ignoring the pain in her bare foot, reaching her hand out. But that hope shattered into a million pieces when Jason reached them and let the cardboard box drop to the dirt with a hollow thud. He couldn't even look them in the eye. He stared at his ruined leather shoes. With a cracked, raspy voice, Jason confessed everything. Getting fired, the audit, the missing $50,000, the threat of jail time, and the complete lack of a severance check. A thick, suffocating silence fell over them, contrasting sharply with the loud traffic of the avenue. And then, the explosion happened. Carol began screaming hysterically, not caring about the pedestrians staring at them. She weakly beat her fists against Jason's chest, cursing her golden boy for being so stupid and reckless. She wailed about her cruel fate, having to die on the streets in her old age, bitterly comparing her current reality to her country club friends who were probably sipping mimosas right now. Vile, unfiltered insults spewed from Carol's mouth, the exact same toxic venom she used to spit at Emily, was now being weaponized against her own son. Madison was just as ruthless. She kicked Jason's cardboard box, scattering his pens into the dirt. She called him a useless, pathetic excuse for a man who ruined all their lives. In that moment of absolute desperation, the illusion of their tight-knit, loving family completely vaporized. There was no unconditional love. There was no loyalty. They were just three selfish, parasitic organisms, turning on each other the second the host body died. Madison blamed Jason for stealing. Jason screamed back, blaming Carol and Madison for demanding a luxury lifestyle that forced him to steal. Carol blamed them both for being useless. When the screaming match finally died down because they physically ran out of energy, Jason made a desperate move. He unclasped the fake Rolex from his wrist, the only thing of value he had on him since he was wearing it when Emily kicked them out. He then aggressively demanded Madison hand over the real gold hoops she was wearing. Madison fought back, scratching and screaming, but Jason and Carol physically overpowered her, ripping the earrings away, claiming it was the only way they wouldn't starve to death. Full of venomous resentment, Madison glared at them. Jason walked to a sketchy pawn shop a few blocks over. Without ID or proof of purchase, the sleazy pawnbroker lowballed him aggressively. Jason had no choice but to take the meager wad of cash, which was barely enough to buy cheap fast food, and rent a room in a dilapidated motel by the interstate for a few nights. That afternoon, they checked into a filthy, rundown motel room that smelled heavily of bleach and stale cigarette smoke. The room was tiny, featuring two lumpy, stained double beds. The wallpaper was peeling, and the AC unit rattled violently. For Carol and Madison, who were used to Emily's pristine, professionally cleaned suburban McMansion, this room was a literal nightmare. Carol complained endlessly about the mold in the bathroom and the bugs on the carpet. That night, they ate lukewarm McDonald's. The atmosphere in the room was toxic. Nobody spoke. They shoved the cheap food down their throats like feral animals, their eyes darting at each other with deep-seated paranoia and hatred. After eating, Jason stuffed the remaining cash into an envelope and shoved it deep under his pillow. He planned to use it the next day to buy a burner phone and look for day labor. Exhausted beyond human limits, Jason and Carol passed out almost immediately, snoring loudly on the cheap mattresses. But Madison didn't sleep. She lay perfectly still, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Her mind was racing. She looked over at her mother and brothers sleeping with their mouths open, feeling a wave of intense disgust. She convinced herself she didn't belong in this filth. She was young, she was pretty, and she deserved luxury. If she stayed with them, the cash would be gone in 3 days, and they'd be back on the street. But if she had all the money, she could buy a bus ticket to Miami, crash with a guy she met online, and find a new rich man to latch onto. Moving with agonizing slowness, Madison slipped her hand under Jason's pillow. Her heart pounded in her ears. Her fingers brushed the paper envelope. Jason shifted in his sleep, and Madison froze, terrified. But he just rolled over and kept snoring. She slid the envelope out, quickly shoved it into her hoodie pocket, and quietly grabbed her plastic trash bag. Without taking a single look back at the mother and brother she was abandoning to die, Madison slipped out the motel door and vanished into the dark, neon-lit highway, taking their absolute last hope of survival with her. The next morning, Jason's agonizing screams echoed through the cheap motel walls. He woke up to find his pillow empty. He tore the bed apart. The cash was gone. He looked around. Madison and her trash bag were gone too. Carol woke up to the screaming. When Jason told her Madison had robbed them and bolted, Carol refused to believe it. She cried, saying her precious baby girl would never do something so evil. But the reality was undeniable. The door wasn't forced open. It was an inside job. Carol collapsed onto the dirty carpet, wailing in genuine, soul-crushing agony. She screamed Madison's name. The daughter she had spoiled and coddled her entire life had treated her like disposable trash. The second things got hard, Jason lost his mind. He punched the motel wall until his knuckles bled, screaming every horrific curse word in the English language. The pain of being betrayed and robbed by his own blood was 1,000 times worse than Emily kicking him out. Emily had every right to hate them. But Madison? Madison was one of them. A parasite eating another parasite. Their ruin was finalized when the aggressive motel manager, alerted by the screaming and the damage to the wall, kicked the door open with a baseball bat in hand. Realizing Jason couldn't pay for the damages or another night, the manager threw them out onto the highway immediately. Now, they literally had zero. Not a penny. Carol could barely walk. The shock of her daughter's betrayal had broken her spirit and her health. She was pale, sweating profusely, and weak. Jason had to physically support his mother's weight as they wandered the blistering hot asphalt of the highway shoulder. In a state of utter delusion, Jason came up with a stupid, desperate idea. He decided to walk all the way back to the gated community. He convinced himself that Emily must have cooled off by now. If she saw how sick his mother was, her Christian guilt would force her to open the door. It took them the entire day to walk the 10 miles back to the affluent suburb. They arrived as the sun was setting, looking like literal zombies. The HOA guard at the gate didn't even recognize them at first. But when Jason begged just to look at the house, the guard, feeling a tiny ounce of pity, let them stand on the public sidewalk across the street. Jason looked at the house. It was completely dark. The driveway was empty. The landscaping was perfectly manicured. But something made Jason's knees buckle, sending him crashing to the pavement. Staked firmly into the pristine front lawn was a massive, bright red sign. Sold. Emily was gone. She hadn't just kicked them out. She had completely erased their existence from her life, liquidated the asset, and vanished. She had taken her success, her money, and her peace, leaving Jason and his mother to rot in a world they had no idea how to survive in. Jason lay on the cold asphalt, hugging his mother's frail legs, weeping uncontrollably in the shadow of the mansion he had once treated like a hotel. For Emily, the weeks following the eviction were a masterclass in healing. The silence in the house was pure magic. No more screaming for coffee at 7 a.m., no more blasting reality TV, no more complaints about the laundry. The house was so peaceful she could hear the wind rustling the oak trees in the backyard. At first, the silence felt weird, but it quickly became the sanctuary she had dreamed of for 5 years. The first thing she did was hire a hazmat-level cleaning crew. They deep-cleaned every inch of the house, threw out the few stray items Jason left behind, and replaced the carpets. She wanted the smell of his cheap cologne, and Carol's heavy perfume eradicated completely. Once the house was sanitized, she called a top-tier real estate agent. She decided to sell the property. Even though she paid for it, the walls held too many toxic memories. She needed a completely blank slate. In this aggressive housing market, the property sold in under 2 weeks for well over the asking price. Taking that cash, along with her untouched savings, Emily bought a stunning, ultra-modern penthouse in the heart of downtown. It was smaller, but infinitely more luxurious, featuring 24/7 concierge security. From her 30th floor balcony, she could see the glittering city lights, a perfect reflection of her future. Without the emotional vampire of her marriage draining her energy, her career went supernova. She poured 100% of her focus into a massive corporate merger audit, delivering flawless results. The partners at the firm were so impressed they promoted her to senior partner. The promotion came with a massive salary bump, a dedicated executive assistant, and a company car. Emily completely revamped her wardrobe. She donated all the modest, cheap clothes she used to wear to avoid triggering Jason's insecurities. Now, her closet was filled with tailored Prada suits and sleek dresses. Her face, once pale and exhausted, now glowed with health and vitality. Her colleagues joked that she was aging backward. To Emily, the divorce wasn't a failure. It was a life-saving surgery to remove a malignant tumor. The legal proceedings were a breeze. Jason never showed up to the court hearings. He couldn't afford a lawyer and couldn't be located to be served. So the judge granted a default judgment entirely in Emily's favor. When the gavel slammed down, Emily didn't shed a single tear. She smiled, thanked her lawyer, and walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than air, as if a pair of concrete boots had been removed from her feet. One rainy evening, while sitting in her penthouse sipping an expensive Pinot Noir and reading a thriller novel, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Usually, she ignored them, but curiosity got the better of her. "Emily, it's Jason. I borrowed a stranger's phone at a gas station. Please help me. Mom is super sick. We're sleeping under a bridge. Madison robbed us and ran away. I feel like I'm dying. I swear to God I'll change. Please let us come home. Is there any love left in your heart for me?" Emily read the message with a completely blank expression. She felt absolutely zero pity, no urge to help, only slight annoyance that her reading time was interrupted. She remembered how Jason went on a weekend fishing trip when she had a 103-degree fever. She remembered Carol throwing a plate of perfectly cooked chicken into the trash because it lacked salt. She remembered the stinging heat of his hand slapping her face. Love? That love had been brutally murdered by their own hands, stabbed in the back over and over again. Without moving a single facial muscle, Emily hit block caller and deleted the thread. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the vibrant city below. She imagined that somewhere down there in the dark alleys, Jason was crying over his miserable fate. But that simply wasn't her problem anymore. Every adult is responsible for their own choices. Jason chose to be an abusive, lazy leech when he had the world handed to him on a silver platter. Now, he had to face the consequences of being a complete loser. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp, clean air of her penthouse. She felt powerful. She realized she never needed a man to build an empire. She was the empire. 1 year later, a luxurious ballroom in a downtown Grand Hotel was immaculately decorated. Tonight was the gala launch of Emily's newly established nonprofit foundation, aimed at providing financial literacy and legal aid to women escaping domestic and financial abuse. Emily, looking absolutely radiant in a custom-tailored emerald gown, cut the ceremonial ribbon to thunderous applause. She was no longer the exhausted, beaten-down wife. She was a powerhouse, a symbol of resilience. Following the champagne reception, the foundation hosted an outreach event in the adjacent hall, distributing 1,000 high-quality care packages containing hot gourmet meals, winter coats, and $100 Visa gift cards to the city's homeless population. Emily insisted on handing them out personally. A long line of people shuffled past the tables. Emily handed each person a bag and an envelope, offering a warm, genuine smile. Then, it was the turn of a severely emaciated man pushing a rusty, squeaking wheelchair. The man was wearing filthy, oversized clothes full of holes. He smelled strongly of urine, unwashed body odor, and despair. In the wheelchair sat an elderly woman in an even worse state, her hair matted to her scalp, her eyes completely vacant and hollow, staring blankly at the floor. Emily held out the heavy care package and the white envelope. "Here you go, sir. God bless you and your mother." The man didn't take the bag immediately. His trembling, dirt-caked hands stopped midair. He looked down at Emily's polished designer heels, and then, with agonizing slowness, he raised his head, his sunken, bloodshot eyes locked onto hers. Time seemed to freeze in the crowded hall. Emily?" His voice cracked, sounding like dry leaves crushing together. Emily looked at him closely. Beneath the layers of grime, the hollowed-out cheeks, and the matted beard, she recognized the facial structure. It was Jason. And the vegetative woman in the wheelchair was Carol. Her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were standing in front of her as literal beggars, waiting for her charity. Emily's heart rate didn't spike. She didn't feel a rush of vengeful anger, nor did she feel a pang of tragic pity. She felt an absolute, profound emptiness. Total indifference. They were nothing more than strangers. Jason stared at her, waiting for a reaction. He braced himself for her to scream at him, to mock him, to call security. Part of him wanted to throw himself at her feet, beg for forgiveness, tell her how deeply he regretted everything. He wanted any acknowledgement that he mattered to her, even if it was hatred. But Emily gave him nothing. Her polite, professional smile didn't waver for a millisecond. She gently placed the care package and the envelope into Jason's trembling hands and immediately shifted her gaze to the next person in line. "Please keep moving forward, sir. There are a lot of people waiting behind you," she said, her tone perfectly pleasant, but completely devoid of recognition. Jason's soul shattered into a million microscopic pieces. Emily's absolute indifference was the most brutal, agonizing punishment he could have ever received. He was invisible to her. He was irrelevant. A security guard stepped up and gently but firmly nudged Jason's shoulder. "Keep it moving, buddy. Let's go." Dazed and broken, Jason pushed his mother's wheelchair toward the exit. Carol didn't even notice. Her bony hands were already tearing into the food bag. Jason stopped on the sidewalk outside the hotel. He turned back just in time to see Emily walking out the glass doors, surrounded by colleagues. A valet opened the door to a sleek Porsche Panamera for her. She slid in, the engine roared to life, and the car sped off down the avenue, carrying her back to her brilliant, untouchable life. She never looked back. Jason sat on the curb and opened the styrofoam container. Inside was roasted chicken, wild rice, and steamed vegetables. It was the best meal he had seen in a year. He fed a spoonful to his mother, who chewed mindlessly, and then he took a bite himself. It tasted incredible, but the flavor was instantly ruined by the hot, salty tears streaming down his face and dripping into the food. He sobbed uncontrollably in the gutter, clutching the styrofoam box as if it were the last remaining anchor to a life he threw away. His regret was an ocean, but it was far too late. He had traded a flawless diamond for a handful of sharp rocks, and those rocks had bled him dry. The door to forgiveness wasn't just locked. The owner had demolished the house and built a castle somewhere else. The most perfect, lethal revenge isn't screaming or seeking destruction. It is becoming so incredibly successful, so peaceful, and so overwhelmingly happy that the existence of the people who tried to break you no longer matters to you in the slightest. Their total ruin was nothing more than a tiny, forgotten footnote in the massive, glowing